Halloween is that time of year I love so much. I think the reason why is because of its dual nature. It's both playful and scary, and I think that's never been so greatly captured than in the story by Washington Irving, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. It's been given new life on the silver screen countless times, retold over and over again for every generation, as immortal as any nursery rhyme. While every movie version has its own twist, the main story stays the same. A school teacher, Ichabod Crane, travels to the humble town of Sleepy Hollow. He competes with the macho Brom Bones for the hand of Katrina Van Tassel. While attending a Halloween party at the home of her wealthy father, he's told the story of the Headless Horseman. His superstition overcomes him, and later that night while traveling home, he's chased by the Headless Horseman himself, or possibly Brom Bones. But there's more to it. When reading the story or watching the films, it's like you're looking in on a small town where ordinary people go about their lives, have fun, tell stories, and play pranks on each other. It's a place of jokes and scares, of tricks and treats. I've gone through most of my life not even considering that Sleepy Hollow was a real place, until I learned it's about 30 miles north of New York City and lies on the eastern bank of the Hudson River. Having been the basis for the story which I've known so long, which has warmed my spirit and so perfectly embodies the spirit of Halloween, I had to go see it for myself. Here I come, Sleepy Hollow. Reading straight out of the book, I quote, "There is a little valley, or rather lap of land among high hills, which is one of the quietest places in the whole world. A small brook glides through it, with just murmur enough to lull one to repose, and the occasional whistle of a quail or tapping of a woodpecker is almost the only sound that ever breaks in upon the uniform tranquility. A drowsy dream influence seems to hang over the land and to pervade the very atmosphere. Some say that the place was bewitched by a high German doctor during the early days of the settlement. Others that an old Indian chief, the prophet or wizard of his tribe, held his powwows there before the country was discovered by Master Henrik Hudson. Certain it is, the place still holds under the sway of some witching power that holds a spell over the minds of the good people, causing them to walk in a continual reverie. I do feel that there is some kind of haunting power that hangs over this land, but at the same time, it feels inviting. Most buildings and landmarks described in the story are lost in time, but the old Dutch church still remains, and this whole area is a main part of the legend. I quote, "The sequestered situation of this church seems always to have made it a favorite haunt of troubled spirits. It stands on a knoll, surrounded by locust trees and lofty elms, from among which its descent whitewashed walls shine modestly forth like Christian purity beaming through the shades of retirement. The dominant spirit, however, that haunts this enchanted region and seems to be commander-in-chief of all the powers of the air is the apparition of a figure on horseback without a head. It is said by some to be the ghost of a Hessian trooper whose head had been carried away by a cannonball in some nameless battle during the Revolutionary War, and who is ever and anon seen by the country folk, hurrying along in the gloom of night as if on the wings of the wind. His haunts are not confined to the valley, but extend at times to the adjacent roads, and especially to the vicinity of the church. I consider the Headless Horseman to be a classic horror icon, like Frankenstein and Dracula. I'd say that's a pretty good comparison, given that the story was published in 1820. That's after Frankenstein, but before Dracula. And to think that such an iconic figure is buried here is pretty interesting. The soldier that's reputed to have been the inspiration for the Headless Horseman is buried in an unmarked grave. While I did as much research as possible, I couldn't find any definitive spot, though as I wandered from the Dutch burial ground and into the neighboring Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, I easily stumbled across the grave of Washington Irving. One thing I always enjoyed about the story is how it feels like the narrator is really talking to you, that he's educating you on the culture of the town. You feel like he knows everybody, and you can imagine him eavesdropping at the bar. The way he tells the tale has a warm feeling, Like have a beer or a cup of hot chocolate, sit back next to the fireplace, put your feet up. I'm going to tell you a story. So you get all relaxed until Ichabod journeys back through the woods. That's the turning point where things get serious. That's another thing I like, is how you don't even realize it's a horror story until the end. I quote, "No signs of life occurred near him, but occasionally the melancholy chirp of a cricket, or perhaps the guttural twang of a bullfrog from a neighboring marsh. All the stories of ghosts and goblins that he had heard in the afternoon now came crowding upon his recollection. The night grew darker and darker, the stars seemed to sink deeper into the sky, and driving clouds occasionally hid them from his sight. He had never felt so lonely and dismal. He was, moreover, approaching the very place where many of the scenes of the ghost stories had been laid." I think we've all had a time when we're alone in the dark and you get that feeling that there's something lurking in the shadows. You hear a strange sound and you try to convince yourself that it's just the wind, but you never know for sure. This feeling has never been so greatly represented than in this story. But the story takes a twist. All of a sudden, the legend appears true. Ichabod meets the Headless Horseman. His terror rose to desperation. He rained a shower of kicks and blows upon Gunpowder, his horse, hoping by a sudden movement to give his companion the slip. But the specters started full jump with him. Away then they dashed through thick and thin, stones flying and sparks flashing at every bound. Ichabod's flimsy garments fluttered in the air as he stretched his long, lank body away over his horse's head in the eagerness of his flight. The chase ends up at an old bridge, which Irving describes earlier in the story. He says, "Over a deep black part of the stream, not far from the church, was formerly thrown a wooden bridge. The road that led to it and the bridge itself were thickly shaded by overhanging trees, which cast a gloom about it, even in the daytime, but occasioned a fearful darkness at night. Such was one of the favorite haunts of the Headless Horseman, and the place where he was most frequently encountered." So unfortunately, the original bridge no longer exists, but this new one is now referred to as the Headless Horseman Bridge. It can be real confusing for a tourist who wants to find the fabled spot where the original bridge once stood. It all feels like it could just as well taken place at this exact location, but according to the story, it was much closer to the church. So I traveled down the river, hopelessly looking for any debris that could be left over from a bridge that stood more than 200 years ago. Seems kinda pointless, but I did find something kinda interesting just east of the church. Whatever it is, it used to span the stream, but its middle portion fell away. You can see the remains in the water and that the walkway continues to the other side. It seems almost like I could cross with an Indiana Jones leap of faith. It looks like this could have been a bridge, or most likely a dam. If we go just west of the church, where Route 9 crosses the stream, we see a sign that reads, "The Headless Horseman Bridge described by Irving in the Legend of Sleepy Hollow formerly spanned this stream at this spot." So this is where we can most confidently take in the final account of Ichabod. An opening in the trees now cheered him with the hopes that the church bridge was at hand. The wavering reflection of a silver star in the bosom of the brook told him that he was not mistaken. He saw the walls of the church dimly glaring under the trees beyond. He recollected the place where Brom Bones' ghostly competitor had disappeared. "If I can but reach that bridge," thought Ichabod, "I am safe." Just then he heard the black steed panting and blowing close behind him. He even fancied that he felt his hot breath. Another convulsive kick in the ribs, and old Gunpowder sprang upon the bridge. He thundered over the resounding planks. He gained the opposite side, and now Ichabod cast a look behind to see if his pursuer should vanish. According to rule, in a flash of fire and brimstone. Just then he saw the goblin rising in his stirrups, and in the very act of hurling his head at him. The next morning, the old horse was found without his saddle and with the bridle under his feet, soberly cropping the grass at his master's gate. In one part of the road leading to the church was found the saddle trampled in the dirt, the tracks of horses' hooves deeply dented in the road and evidently at furious speed were traced to the bridge, beyond which, on the bank of a broad part of the brook where the water ran deep and black, was found the hat of the unfortunate Ichabod, and close beside it a shattered pumpkin. The old country wives, however, who are the best judges of these matters, maintain to this day that Ichabod was spirited away by supernatural means, and it is a favorite story often told about the neighborhood around the winter evening fire. The bridge became more than ever an object of superstitious awe, and that may be the reason why the road has been altered of late years, so as to approach the church by the border of the mill pond. And still, to this day, I feel a chill in the air just standing here, reflecting on one of the greatest stories ever told in the Halloween capital of the world, Sleepy Hollow.